Hi, everybody. This is Cindy Kennedy. You're listening to another episode of Living with Lyme. We are going to be talking with Dr. Kevin Connors today, and he is a well-known doc in the field of anti-aging, regeneration, functional medicine, and integrative cancer therapies. He's also working now in in a new area of botanical medicine, so that's really exciting. He's an authored gentleman here. He's got some great books. He talks a lot about Lyme brain and 3 phases of Lyme, and we're going to get deep into what causes brain inflammation. I think a lot of people suffer from that feeling of what we call brain fog, and it's one of the things that may be the last to go when people are chronically sick. So let's kind of jump in and talk to Dr. Connors. He's actually from Minnesota for anyone else that's out there and wondering where he resides. Thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dr. Cindy. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, love it, love it, love it. So, the whole thing about our poor brain, it's a big ball of fat and it accumulates a lot of stuff. And tell me a little bit about what causes brain inflammation.
When you think of brain inflammation, a lot of the research actually on brain inflammation is coming out of traumatic brain injury research and post-concussive syndrome.
Yeah.
You don't want to say thank goodness for all that disorder, but it's certainly bringing to light some of the problems that people with Lyme and other heavy metal toxic issues that I guess weren't getting enough press, in the past, nor enough research press. So, but probably the biggest causes of brain issues are traumatic brain injury, infections that can cross the blood-brain barrier, like Lyme, autoimmune issues, different inflammatory cytokines can cross the blood-brain barrier. Certainly, if you have a break in the blood-brain barrier, anything can cross the blood-brain barrier. Heavy metals, certainly you talk about heavy metals in vaccines and such in children less than 3 that yet to have a blood-brain barrier can cause inflammation in the brain and long-term detrimental effects on the microglial cells and the astrocytes and such.
So
And even
those are cellular areas of the brain, gliosites and astrocytes.
Yeah, so if you want to talk a little bit about anatomy, just to kind of clarify, the brain is a ball of fat. I would agree, but inside that ball of fat is your neurons. So that's what everybody thinks of as that's what connects one part of the brain to the rest of the brain or the rest of the body are your neurons. They send signals of communication, tell your muscle to contract or tell your thought process to take place from your prefrontal cortex. So those are your neurons. Your neurons are held together by what was thought to be just like glue, these other cells. So they named those cells glial cells. That's Latin for glue. Until research showed about 40 years ago, started showing that these are different types of cells, and actually they do just about as much or more than the neurons do, these different glial cells. So the different glial cells in the brain are your astrocytes, your oligodendrocytes, and your microglial cells. They're all very important in the brain. They do different things. You talk about the blood-brain barrier. Many of your listeners might be intimate with that term, your blood-brain barrier. Your blood-brain barrier is actually um, you formed by your astrocytes surrounding the blood vessels in the brain. And the astrocytes limit what can access the brain through the bloodstream. And damage to those astrocytes equals damage to the blood-brain barrier. So if there's damage to the astrocytes, then things that were never supposed to get into the brain now are getting into the brain, and that can cause all sorts of problems.
And those astrocytes heal.
Astrocytes can heal, but once glial cells die, they're gone. whereas neurons can regenerate and neurons can reconnect. That's called neuroplasticity, where they'll reconnect to another neuron and form another synapse and form another connection. Astrocytes, microglial cells, oligodendrocytes, once they die, they're gone. Can another astrocyte take its place in the blood-brain barrier? There's new research showing that, yes, that's possible. So there are specific nutrients that can help heal the blood-brain barrier, but I think the operative word is help there. One with a very damaged blood-brain barrier, it's probably a lifetime of work trying to help heal that blood-brain barrier. So there are some specific nutrients like ginkgo and vinpocetine and huperzine that can help heal that blood-brain barrier by helping stimulate other astrocytes to take an injured astrocyte's place.
While we're talking about supplements, is there a role for phosphatidylcholine when it comes to any damage or even as a protective for neurons?
Phosphatidylserine is probably a better brain protective. Phosphatidylcholine is a great cell membrane precursor. So both those products are great. For phosphatidylcholine helps make up all your cell membranes. So it's definitely good for the brain. It's also a neurotransmitter too in the brain. So it's also is what makes up our bile in the liver. So phosphatidylcholine is an extremely necessary nutrient, and yeah, and so indirectly it's affecting the brain if you're not getting adequate bile production in phase 3 detox of the liver. So and certainly you see people with just less than healthy cell membranes throughout their body is a major cause of disease anywhere. So taking phosphatidylcholine as a supplement is very beneficial.
Right. And some people have genetic um, SNPs, single nucleic polymorphisms, and they really need a lot more. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, not everybody has access or even wants to know all of that genetic, but it's enzyme material that I'm talking about. And yeah, because I actually did my 23andMe and I sent it off to a platform that I'm on. And yeah, I'm one of those people. I need more of it. So,
right. Yeah.
well, what would you say are the most common symptoms of brain inflammation?
Well, the most common symptoms are of brain. So you got brain inflammation is kind of goes on a sliding scale. So it's listed in the literature as mild, moderate, and severe. So somebody with severe brain inflammation is somebody with later stage dementia, seizures, um, uh, you know, very medical conditions that probably won't walk into our offices necessarily. Moderate brain inflammation is this person who is would readily say, I got such horrible brain fog. I mean, there's days that if I eat gluten, I can't wake up I'm in bed the next day. I can't even get up. Or any little trigger will just stimulate them into collapse. I bumped my head and oh my gosh, I had to go lay down for, a few hours. And a little bump that maybe you or I would get in, it's no big deal. We bump our head because we're clumsy or something like that. Um,
Speak for yourself now.
Okay,
Come
all right.
on.
So, but then, and mild is something that we should be more recognizing is that we're starting to forget things. Is probably the most common thing that you'll have. Not those are things that would be considered transient, that aren't necessarily suggestive of some of the things that we'll get into talking about damaged microglial cells here, but it gives you clues that there is some inflammation in the brain. So it does go on a sliding scale. Normal aging is causing inflammation in the brain, and even emotional issues, PTSD issues is causing inflammation in the brain. I'll give you perfect, for instance, is uh, what has gone on in this last year in 2020 with all the stress that people have been on. Stress can increase inflammation in the brain, and your brain cells, uh, aka this other glial cell called the microglial cell, is what really has to take care of that, has to get rid of that inflammation in the brain. um, and the stress on those, there is a finite number of those that you have, and they don't there's no more neurogenesis, no more recreation of those cells once they're damaged. And that's really the issue with those different levels, and the sliding scale that a person is on is how much damage that they've had to the microglial cells and their inability to get rid of this inflammation.
A lot of people will talk about forgetfulness and word find issues. But isn't that part, and I'm going to quote this, we read, that's normal part of aging.
Yes, it is. But inflammation, an increased inflammation and the inability to get rid of it is a part of normal aging. Um, I think it's foolish to say, well, it's just normal aging, so I'm not going to do anything about it. It should say, yeah, this is a part of normal aging because I'm prone to more inflammation and lesser health of my microglial cells in my brain as I age. So therefore, I should take some proactive steps. I should be taking some things that will calm down the inflammation in my brain. And we'll get to that. What are some specific action steps a person can have when they recognize mild to moderate um, inflammation
Right,
in their
right.
brain?
That's probably what everybody wants to know. What do I do? A lot of people who are chronically ill already take so many supplements. Maybe it would be very rewarding for them to hear maybe what some of the things that they're taking are actually doing double duty.
Yeah, these are all really double duty things. So the things that you would use to decrease inflammation in your body are also things that will readily cross the blood-brain barrier and help decrease inflammation in the brain. So what might maybe this is getting a little too technical, but I think for me at least, I think it helps to understand the mechanism a little bit. So I'll try to put it in as easy as terms as possible. Remember, I said you have different types of glial cells. The astrocytes surround the blood vessels and um, and make up the blood-brain barrier and uh, help prevent bad things from getting in the brain. The problem is if I have a lot of inflammation in my body, those inflammatory chemicals called cytokines will stimulate inflammation in the brain. So inflammation in my body will stimulate inflammation in my brain. Also, inflammation in my liver and inflammation in my gut will stimulate inflammation in my brain neurologically. So those inflammatory cytokines and CRP, which is made in the liver, will actually crawl up cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, and stimulate inflammation in the brain.
Wow, calls up the vagus nerve, huh?
Yep, those has afferent and efferent pathways, meaning in and out pathways. It goes right up the afferent pathway and stimulates inflammation in the brain. There's lots of research that support that. So um, that's when functional medicine doctors often say, well, inflammation in the gut equals inflammation in the brain. This is how it happens. So
Mhm.
you have increased inflammatory markers from eating um, food sensitive proteins like gluten or dairy or something like that. That's going to increase inflammation in the brain. And when you do increase inflammation in the brain, there's another glial cell called the microglial cells that are responsible to scavenge that out. So microglial cells, their responsibility is not in the blood-brain barrier, but they crawl around similar to macrophages. Macrophages is an immune cell that crawls around your body looking for pathogens to devour. and engulf. That's what microglial cells do in the brain. They crawl around, they have little tentacles. There's really cool videos that you could probably YouTube on microglial cells, how they scavenge around, crawling around, looking for pathogens. So they kill pathogens. So it is your brain's immune system. They kill pathogens and they grab onto inflammatory cytokines. They get rid of those. And that's what microglial cells, they keep your brain clean. So your brain, when you talk about brain fog, like I can't remember a word, or I can't remember why I walked in this room. That's because neurons, that communication is taking place on neurons, and that neural communication is slowed because of inflammation caused by all sorts of things that we just discussed. So how do we get rid of that inflammation? Microglial cells. So we need healthy microglial cells to get rid of that inflammation. Problem comes in is that when we have traumatic brain injury or horrible Lyme disease that can cross the blood-brain barrier, so you have pathogens that enter the blood-brain barrier, or damaged blood-brain barrier and mercury or aluminum get across the blood-brain barrier. And then you have actually damage to these microglial cells. And remember, I said these glial cells, all of them, only have one life and they don't reproduce itself. So these microglial cells then can become damaged. And a damaged microglial cell, not to get too technical, is called a primed microglial cell. It loses its tentacles and it doesn't crawl around anymore. Well, that's not good because we need them crawling around, clearing the space, getting rid of pathogens, getting rid of inflammation. So all of us have some primed glial cells. The more damage we've had, the more times we've fallen and smacked our head on the ice, we've gotten in a horrible car accident and had a concussion, you definitely have more primed glial cells. And the more primed glial cells one has, the more that they have to be vigilant in doing some specific nutraceuticals to help calm that down. Because once a glial cell becomes primed, it never becomes unprimed. It loses its tentacles. Now it sits there. It still has action, still has some benefit, but it'll sit there in one of two states, a hyper-inflammatory state called an M1 state, and a hypo-inflammatory state, a decreasing inflammatory state called an M2 state. And you want your microglial cells that are primed to be in an M2 state. So not to get so technical and maybe lose some people here, but the things that you would do to help decrease inflammation in the brain from a nutraceutical approach are the same things that you would do to reduce inflammation anywhere else in the body from a nutraceutical approach. But also those same things will help push primed glial cells to the M2 state. So they're not spewing out more inflammation. So they're not spewing out inflammatory chemicals, cytokines, that are then greater decreasing the brain's ability to function. So the person that has that sliding scale of I have more brain fog, I can't remember where I am, I don't feel well, all these different symptoms of brain inflammation, which includes to the greater extent, like I said, seizures and lack of motor function, the greater the job that they need to work on decreasing that inflammation and helping heal that blood-brain barrier back.
What's the role of toxins in brain blah, 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 brain inflammation? Because you just mentioned traumatic brain injury, but I'm thinking of a lot of people that have come to me. I found metals or mold, uh, those kind of things, or even things that we've done environmental testing and they've got high levels of things that they're probably breathing in, possibly because of their work environment.
Yeah.
What's the role of those?
Well, that's a huge cause. That's a huge piece of the cause. So heavy metals, let's talk about those first. So heavy metals can cross the blood-brain barrier. Remember, there's areas in that blood flow through the brain, that there is no barrier, because there needs to be active diffusion and osmosis of chemicals across it. In the hypothalamus area, there is no blood-brain barrier. So chemicals can get across there that should not be circulating in our blood in the first place. We shouldn't have exposure to mercury and to aluminum. And people will say, well, there's mercury in our environment. And well, yeah, well, you might ingest some mercury in fish, but you shouldn't be absorbing it if you have a healthy gut barrier. There's no absorption sites for mercury in your gut. It's only because you have a damaged gut barrier that it actually gets into the bloodstream. So
That's
just there's
really important, because that's a little tidbit for me to know, because I was not aware that you can absorb metals through the lining if that lining is in good shape.
intact. Yep.
I didn't. That's actually, I'm writing that one down right now. Okay.
So having a good intact gut barrier. So you think of when you eat something, it still isn't a part of your body unless it gets absorbed. So it's still in a tube,
Yeah.
going through a tube, and hopefully will be deposited in the toilet if you have a good gut barrier.
Mm.
The worst thing with metals is things that you absorb. So the fastest way to absorb things in your body is what? Getting them injected into your arm, probably, right? That's the fastest way to absorb things. Second fastest way to absorb things is through your lungs. So you mentioned breathing chemicals in. So boy, we live in polluted air now, right? With
Mm.
all sorts of chemicals that we're breathing in. So they go right across your lung alveolar spaces and right into the blood. So that's circulated in your blood. That never should have been. And then through your gut, and typically through a damaged gut barrier, you get things through. And your skin is a barrier too. So hopefully things aren't getting through if you spill stuff on your skin as readily. But then once it's in your blood circulating, we hope that your liver is getting rid of these things. But people have clogged livers, and you mentioned some specific genetic pathway defects. If you have defects on your cytochrome P450 or your PON1 pathways, you're not going to be able to readily excrete these things through phase 1, 2, and 3 of your liver detox. So then they circulate around another time and another time. And if you have a damaged blood-brain barrier, they can get across into your brain. So if they get across into the brain, these are foreign things, and they could be heavy metals, they could be glyphosates, they could be all sorts of pesticides and chemicals that we're exposed to. So again, what gets rid of these things? Well, in your brain, it's your microglial cells have to wrap around them. Problem is that these can be very toxic, and they can actually cause a microglial cell to become primed. So they basically are damaging the microglial cell. So they can actually affect the oligodendrocytes, that's the other glial cells, that form the myelin sheaths. So that's where the cause of MS is. So damage to the myelin sheath, that's MS is a kind of a garbage can diagnosis to anything that could damage the myelin sheath and then disrupt transmission uh, of a neuron. So heavy metals can cause that. Lyme disease could cause that. Mold could cause that. All sorts of different causes of MS. Anything that's going to disrupt the oligodendrocytes. So um, that causes an issue. So if it damages microglial cells, they can become primed. And if they get stuck in a M1 state, they're spewing out inflammation. And then that is a cause of brain inflammation in itself. So now you have this increased brain fog that's continuing to worsen over time. And if you start taking some of the taking this serious and not thinking that you should run to necessarily drugs, because drugs tend to not work. There's nutraceuticals that can be extremely effective in reducing this, um, uh, and that's what we'll talk about.
Yeah. You're not going to get this type of care at your primary care doctor. And I can't emphasize enough that insurance does not often cover for a comprehensive approach with someone who really thinks out of the box. And again, we were talking before we started recording, and it's unfortunate that the way medicine works in our country and probably in other countries as well, is that they're slammed. They don't have enough time. They don't have enough capability or income from the insurance companies to put any type of comprehensive program together. I mean, a lot of people don't know what to eat or think they're eating clean when they're really not eating clean. Or if they're told to eat gluten free, they then choose everything gluten free that's laden with fat and sugar drives inflammation and those kind of things. So it's so important for people who are listening who have not gotten the answers they need and do not feel the best they can to really look into a different approach, because you owe it to yourself. You have one body, one life, and why not make it the best you can? That's the end of my lecture.
That's a good lecture. It is a very good lecture. You see that a lot when, and people think, well, the problem is if they have this horrible brain fog, I just need to stop eating gluten. But then they go gluten free, like you said, and so many of the gluten free foods are not um, organic. So they're eating tons of GMOs and glyphosate laden products that that is just as bad. Sometimes maybe even worse. So it is difficult. I am in this, I'm a person too trying to live in this world and eat well, and it's difficult to do so. It's difficult to even know what to do.
Right, it's expensive. It's
Yeah.
expensive. And people think they have to have a degree in nutrition to eat well, and that's not the case. You don't need to. If you want to do that, that's lovely, but what you do is you work with someone who has that background and can start you kind of like simplistically. I love my daughter works with me, and she's a dietitian, and she put together a nice, simple, very inexpensive 7-day meal plan that talks about whole foods. I mean, it gives people an opportunity to just kind of look into what would it mean? How do I do this? People need like structure. And what's really nice about this particular program is that it offers grocery lists, meal prep guide, and all the recipes. You have that forever. You can share it with your friends, you can share it with your family. It's not intended that can't keep it and share it. And it gives people an opportunity. When it comes to supplements, which I'm dying to talk about, they're not created equal. And I've learned that, I'm going to cringe when I even say this, but these gigantic box stores that have a gallon size thing of omega fish oil, and I just want to cringe. People also need to learn a little bit more about their supplements, where they come from, what kind of companies they come from, and the background of the companies. So, although we're not going to talk about that per se, I just wanted to give people a heads up. When you talk about the things that can help, you really need to have good companies that you're purchasing your supplements from.
Well, for sure. You talk about the gallon size thing of fish oils. I mean, literally, I knew a rep who was working with a reputable company with fish oils, and literally, when fish oils are processed from salmon, cold water fish, they might even be cold water fish wild caught in Alaska or something like that. The companies will literally take non-rendered fish oil and without it being filtered for heavy metals, and that goes in one vat and that's sold to the company that sells at a big box store. And then the good companies then clean that up, take all the heavy metals out. There's heavy metals in our waters, right? There's heavy metals in our fish oils. And we think that we're doing a good thing by taking these fish oils from, a big box store, and because they're so much less expensive, so less, they're, what a deal I'm getting on this, and they're laden with toxins and heavy metals. You really could do more harm than good. There was a study out a couple of years ago by an independent company. Wish I would have saved it, because they went to, and I'll name the stores because I think they went to Walmart, Target, GNC, and another one, and they bought herbs, milk thistle, ashwagandha, and a couple other things, and they found the highest quantity of what was on the label was only 10% of what was on the label. Some of them had 0% of what was on the label. There's no
Wow.
oversight in this, and you really do have to buy from a reputable company, um, because there's just no oversight. So you need to buy from somebody who's selling reputable supplements, that these are independently lab tested for potency, um, and for what that it will still read label standards even after expiration date. And that's really important, because we don't want to waste money. If you're going to take supplements, take the right stuff. Um, but also, I would agree, we try not to put people on too many things that it's just not sustainable. If a person is told to take 35 different supplements, I mean, how many people are going to stay on something like that? It's just, I'm not. So we don't put people on that, because I wouldn't do it. I mean, maybe for a time if I was really, really sick, but I'm not going to sustain that. We're talking about brain fog and decreasing inflammation. You you want to be able to have a sustainable protocol.
Right, right. And let's talk about that protocol.
Well, first things, there's other things you want to do other than just supplements for this brain inflammation. Getting on a cleaner diet, a hypo-inflammatory diet, everything that you're saying, cleaning up the gut, making sure that I don't have food sensitivities that are causing, systemic inflammation, um, because that again is going to cause brain inflammation. Making sure that I'm working in my liver detox pathways, and I'm trying to keep that as healthy as possible. Um, I will say another side caveat with brain inflammation, moderate to severe brain inflammation and microglial priming, you cannot be on alcohol at all. So cutting way back to almost zero alcohol use for those people is really important.
I have to
Um,
ask you, I'm going to stop you there. Has there been research done comparing countries that have wine, say, many times a day versus the general population here that either binge drinks or whatnot? Are they more apt, like are Italians more apt to have brain inflammation? That's just
no,
quickie.
No, so I would say I don't think alcohol causes brain inflammation, but a person that's already has primed glial cells and is already in that moderate to severe stage, um, it just makes it worse. You have to stop alcohol.
Maybe at the
So
level of the liver. It's really maybe the processing through the liver and the byproduct that
it
is,
is,
yeah, the
and
byproduct. It's
you
an
know,
awful thing when you read about the stages of breaking down alcohol and what's released. It makes it not fun anymore.
right? You have all sorts of aldehyde production, which can cause issues, but wine does have resveratrol in it and other polyphenols in it that can be beneficial. So, um, if you're in that mild stage, or you're not, wine isn't necessarily a bad thing. Of course, if you're drinking a bottle a day, that might be a different story. But
Yeah, right, right. Unless it's one of those almost small size bottles that's like
yeah,
maybe a glass. Then you can say,
that's right.
I drink a bottle a day. I learned that a long time ago when it's all up to interpretation. If you ask
That's right.
somebody how much they're drinking and they say, oh, social, not much, you really have to ask. And it kind of puts people on the fence because a long time ago, I worked with obstetric patients. And one of the questions was, and how much caffeine, do you have a day? Oh, not much at all. And something made me ask her. And she said, oh, just a pot a day. Yeah, one a day, but not one cup. It was one pot. So you got to,
Yeah,
it's all up to interpretation.
that's
All
right.
right.
That's
So we're going
exactly
to
right.
eat better. We're going to eat cleaner. We're going to understand what's in our food and in our water.
Yes.
And what about our lifestyle behaviors?
Well, exercise is so important, because how your neurons are dependent upon oxygen and activation. So that's how it keeps your neurons developed. So having a lifestyle, one of the worst things a person in maybe moderate, early to moderate dementia can do is to stop learning, to stop challenging their brain. It's one of the worst things you can do. You need activation of those neurons. That helps excite microglial cells and will help actively clean up the brain. So you have to have brain activation is essential. So, okay, I'm 75 years old and I'm getting some dementia. My dad is, let's say, what should I have him do? Have him learn a new task. Have him become active in novel information, meaning like I have not learned that before. Um, Putting little jigsaw puzzles together. One of the best brain activities there are, because it's basically all novel tasks, because you might have put that puzzle together, that 1,000-piece puzzle together 2 weeks ago, but putting it together again, it's going to be all new. So novel tasks are very beneficial. Of course, that's not a very oxygenating task. So getting out and getting some oxygen, getting some exercise is very beneficial too. So you need oxygen and activation for brain activity to stay healthy. Um, Things like you said, watching your air pollution, watching just trying to drink purified water and things like that are wise things to do, so you're not getting fluoride in your water and chlorine and other contaminants. And EMFs, which could be a whole other hour discussion,
Yeah.
are negatively affecting our brain and our health. And stress, obviously we touched on that a little bit. um, but then you get into the nutraceuticals. It's really a lot of the same things that you would do to decrease inflammation of the brain. So curcumin, turmeric, the active form of turmeric, very anti-inflammatory. There's studies that show that readily crosses the blood-brain barrier. So that will, if you do have prime glial cells, that will push them to the M2 state, the anti-inflammatory state. It'll help decrease inflammation in the brain. Um, uh, Omegas, you touched on omega fatty acids. So omegas can be very anti-inflammatory to the brain. They're good for the gut. They're good for the cell membranes. Phosphatidylcholine can be anti-inflammatory. Phosphatidylserine is even more anti-inflammatory to the brain. Other anti-inflammatories and things that we talk about that push Th2 um, immune function, like resveratrol, green tea extract, EGCG catechins from green tea extract. And everybody asks that, well, can I just drink green tea? Will that do it? No, not really. You need to drink, a couple gallons of green tea to get green tea extract. And you talk about um, contaminated supplements. Probably the most contaminated supplement on the market is green tea extract.
Wow. Now
All
that's
of
coming
green
out.
tea.
A lot of people listening, they're going to go to their cabinet now and pitch it.
Well, it depends on what product you have. So you need to get a good quality company. That's where you're buying your green tea extract from. All of it's coming from China. There is not a green tea extract on the market that's not coming from China. Um, but there's some very reputable Chinese growers that are doing all organic. And then there's very reputable companies here that are doing independent testing on the batches that they get. And if they're super anal, super, high standard company, they'll just ship it back. Nope, we're not accepting this. And then that grower will know he's going to send that company their best stuff all the time, because he does not want to get an order back. So
Right, right.
um,
One of the trickiest things people need to know when they look at their bottles, if it says manufactured in the United States, people think, great, it's all from the United States, but
yeah,
they got to understand that doesn't mean the contents or the ingredients, the raw material is from the United States. It just means they order it and then they put it all together in
right.
the United States.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I just found out that there's food engineers. Like these are not nice people. Who goes into a science laden derived vocation to get people addicted via what the brain is wired for, which are fats and sweets. And so I'm like, this just is not nice. This is almost like pushing heroin, I mean, and people have strong genetic tendencies towards addiction, and it doesn't mean that they're going to become an alcoholic or they're going to become a gambler. But it leads into these people's behaviors that they don't understand.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so we're not going to get addicted to
Exactly.
our curcumin and our omegas, but we're really going to have that definitely help with our brain inflammation. um those are the big ones, right?
Those are the big ones. So turmeric, green tea extract, grape seed extract,
Rapeseed.
uh,
True that. Yes,
the
yes.
bark extracts like pine bark extract. Those are good things that decrease inflammation. Um, Boswellia decreases inflammation. Alpha lipoic acid, even though that's an antioxidant, you need antioxidant activity in the brain as well. That's how you're going to get rid of those oxidizing agents, those poisons we talked about, the toxins that can cause oxidation and cause brain cancers.
Mm.
And then dealing with the gut as well, dealing with all of that issues.
Right, right. I mean, uh, there's a product out there. New Chapter makes it Zyflamend. Am I saying it right? Are you familiar with that
I'm
one?
not familiar with that one, no.
No, it has it's it's intended for inflammation, maybe short-term use after you've injured your knee or something, but it has a list of a lot of anti-inflammatory herbal products in it. I'm going to have to look and see just how many of your superpowers here are in that, because
Yeah,
that.
there's a lot of companies that make a blend like that that are good. Um, we use one from Designs for Health. I think it's called. We private label it. Our label's called Clear Inflam, but I think it's Inflamatone from Designs for Health. That's good. You mentioned Research Nutraceuticals. They have a product called BDNF Essentials, and that stands for Brain Derived Neurotropic Factor. Brain derived neurotropic factor is an enzyme that's created in the brain to help neurons heal and regenerate and help decrease inflammation. So that's another good product. We use
What was
that.
the name of that one again?
BDNF,
Oh,
brain.
BDNF. Yes, yes.
So that's a good. They also have a product called Cytoquel that is solely for decreasing inflammation. Apex Energetic has what's it called? XFLM, as in blocking inflammation. That's a good one for decreasing inflammation. That's a good brain product. So there's a lot of good products on the market that are made for inflammation. So
Right,
they all work really well.
right, right. And it's nice to have one kind of product that does you get more bang for your buck, because
Yes.
people are just like, Cindy, please, not one more thing. And I'm
Yep.
like, but especially and I always try to explain to people, right now you may need more of something until we can get to that even state. So we really need to provide you with more. So that's why I can't give you something that's just status quo, or there's just not enough to make a big difference. So I think that's great to let people know, and I should remember this, that once we get over this biggest hump here and you're feeling better, we can then put you on something that kind of gives you a little of everything, and that can be for maintenance.
Right. And inflammation and taking something for inflammation should be something that everybody should take for maintenance, because um, we live in a very hyper-inflammatory world with all the chemicals that we're being exposed to and the oxidizing agents that we're being exposed to that causes inflammation. And as we age, we get more bumps and bruises, and our anti-inflammatory intercellular processes don't work as well. So taking anti-inflammatory nutrition is very beneficial.
Right.
Um, and
Right.
it
We are,
does so
yeah.
many things. So,
We certainly are what we eat. And
right,
it doesn't, people are like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And the problem with that kind of an attitude is you can make change. You just have to want to make change.
right,
And the way I love working with Kara so much is that she gives unique ways to do it, especially like when we work with kids and they just will not touch, vegetables and things. And so by, creating smoothies or taking the smoothies and making them popsicles and, I mean, fun stuff like that. Kids can wrap their head around that, not even knowing what they're
right,
having is good for them because
right,
somehow good for them means it doesn't taste good.
right.
It doesn't have to be that way, does it?
That's right. Exactly.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Um, when we talk about detoxification, our biggest area that we detoxify, we know, is the gut. And uh, but what about the sweating aspect, especially when we're dealing with Lyme and mold and metals? Are you a proponent for sauna therapy?
Oh, absolutely. So detoxification happens in, you have different organs of detoxification. Your liver, obviously, right? And your liver pulls things out of the blood and puts them in a form that can be then deposited into the intestines, that can be then deposited into the toilet. Same thing, supports your liver. Or what your liver does is support kidney detoxification. And your lungs are or an organ of detoxification. Breathing out, that's what getting out and exercising in a clean environment. You are detoxifying things out of your alveolar spaces into the air and throwing them out through your breathing. And then sweating. Your skin is your largest organ of detoxification. So sweating is super, super important. So we really push sauna therapy and getting out in the sun and in the summer times, staying away from getting burned, but getting out and sweating and working is very beneficial. So the more you can sweat, the more you're detoxifying.
Right, right, right. And a big part of all your detoxification is your hydration. Do you
Sure.
yeah.
Yep.
People don't drink enough, do they?
No, no, they don't. And probably the most important thing is you have to be eliminating, right? So if you're not having a daily bowel movement at least once a day, then we're already in trouble. But
Right, right, right. You
and,
gotta you gotta get rid of it. It's
yeah,
funny because you gotta be able to talk to people on the level about their bowel movements and their habits. And some people really they talk potty mouth when they talk about their potty habits. And I try not to raise my eyebrows or whatever. I'm past bad words, but
yeah,
it has to be, right?
right.
Well, wonderful. Do you have any last thoughts that you really want to encourage people or suggest to people?
Well, last thoughts about brain inflammation would be don't ignore early signs, but don't get scared either. Don't think, oh my gosh, I'm going to get Alzheimer's like my mom because I can't remember words. Well, the truth is you might. So do some things now so that you can at least push that out into a distance. Those little microglial cells that are getting rid of inflammation are getting rid of tau tangles and such that cause Alzheimer's. So they're getting rid of those things. So keeping those little microglial cells healthy by doing some nutritional things to, and I get it, you don't want to take any other supplements, but okay, well, stop, your cup of coffee every day and start taking some turmeric instead. It's just that, like you said, the choices that you have to make to push Alzheimer's out another 10 years, so that if you are going to get it because you have, ApoE genes that are going to be precursors to this, at least you might get it when you're 90 instead of when you're 70, make a big difference in the joy of life. So making some choices in life to decrease inflammation, exercise, dietary changes, healing your gut, taking some anti-inflammatories for your brain can give you a lot better quality of life in the long term. So
It sounds good. It sounds good. It's also part of creating a new lifestyle and a habit, because if we can create bad habits, we can turn them into or change them into a good habit and then
right,
stop the bad habit, right?
that's right.
Awesome. Awesome. Everybody, this has been Dr. Kevin Connors, and we have been talking all about brain inflammation. I hope you enjoyed it, because I know that I'm going to my cabinet and reminding myself to take my curcumin and my fish oil today. For everybody, this has been another episode of Living with Lyme. We want to thank Dr. Connors, and we want to thank you all for listening. It's been my pleasure to bring you this information. Come back and listen soon. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Oh,